Picture this. You're standing barefoot on a rock. Not a nice rock. A jagged, sun-baked, ankle-twisting nightmare of a rock, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, 40,000 years ago. There's no Nike store. There's no cobbler. There's no guy named Greg who makes sandals on the side. And yet, somehow, the humans standing on that rock survived. They hunted. They ran. They chased down animals that were faster than them, over terrain that would make a modern hiker cry into his $40 moisture-wicking socks. And they did it all without a single shoe. So here's the question that's going to ruin your next trip to the shoe store. Why didn't ancient humans wear shoes? Was it because they didn't know better? Was it because shoes hadn't been invented yet? Or is it possible, and stay with me here, Sarces, that the human foot was never actually designed to need them in the first place? Because here's the twist nobody tells you. Some of our ancestors absolutely did wear something on their feet. Just not what you think, not when you think, and definitely not why you think. And the real story involves ice ages, mummies, bone scans, a 5,000-year-old man found frozen in the Alps, a very confused group of scientists, and one incredibly stubborn tendon in your foot that's been quietly judging you every time you put on a shoe. So lace up, or actually don't. That's kind of the whole point. And let's get into it. Let's start with the obvious question. When did humans actually start wearing footwear? You'd think this would be easy to figure out. Just dig up an old shoe, carbon date it, done. Except leather and plant fiber don't exactly last 50,000 years. They rot, they decompose, they become dirt. So archaeologists had to get clever. And by clever, I mean they had to start looking at toe bones. Yes, toe bones. Stick with me. Here's the logic. When you walk barefoot your whole life, your toes do a lot of work. They grip the ground, they flex, they absorb force, and over years that constant use makes your toe bones thicker and stronger, especially the smaller toes. But when you wear a rigid shoe, something changes. Your big toe still pushes off the ground because that's just biomechanics, but your smaller toes barely have to do anything. The shoe is doing the gripping and stabilizing for you. So over generations, populations that consistently wore supportive footwear develop noticeably thinner, weaker small toe bones compared to populations that went barefoot. A researcher named Eric Trinkaus figured this out by comparing toe bones from different points in human prehistory, and the pattern was strangely consistent. Around 40,000 years ago, in certain populations, toe bones start getting thinner. Not because human feet suddenly evolved overnight. Evolution doesn't work that fast, but because something external changed the way people were using their feet. And the leading suspect for that something external is footwear. Not fashionable footwear. Not look at my new kicks footwear. Functional, wrap it around your foot so you don't die of frostbite footwear. Which brings us to the real reason ancient humans eventually started covering their feet. And it has nothing to do with comfort. It's called an ice age. You ever complain about winter because your car won't start? Try surviving a literal glacial period with nothing but your own skin. Around 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, big parts of the world where humans were living got brutally, catastrophically cold. And here's the thing about frostbite. It doesn't care how tough you are. It doesn't care how many burpees you can do. If your feet are exposed to sub-zero temperatures for long enough, the blood vessels constrict, tissue starts dying, and you lose toes. Sometimes you lose your whole foot. In the ancient world, losing a foot wasn't an inconvenience. It was often a death sentence because a human who can't walk, can't hunt, can't gather, can't run from predators, and can't keep up with the group. So evolution didn't need to give humans furry, insulated feet like a polar bear. Humans did something much smarter. They invented technology to solve the problem instead. Wrap the foot in animal hide, tie it with a strip of sinew, and suddenly you've got a survival tool that no other animal on the planet can just make for itself. That's the real origin of the shoe. Not fashion, not status. Survival in freezing conditions that human biology alone couldn't handle. And we actually have physical proof of this, frozen in a glacier of all places. In 1991, hikers in the Alps stumbled onto a body sticking out of the ice, nicknamed Otzi, a man who died around 5,000 years ago and got naturally mummified by the cold. And guess what was still on his feet? Shoes. Actual, constructed shoes, made from deerskin and bearskin, stuffed with soft grass for insulation like some kind of prehistoric wool sock. This wasn't a random scrap of leather tied on as an afterthought. It was engineered footwear, built specifically for cold mountain terrain, thousands of years before anyone had a concept of a shoe brand. Ötzi wasn't wearing shoes because it was trendy. He was wearing them because he lived somewhere that would kill him without them. Take that same guy and drop him somewhere warm, and there's a decent chance he's walking around barefoot most of the time because that's what the evidence from warmer ancient climates consistently shows. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part that really messes with people's assumptions. For the vast majority of human existence, in the vast majority of climates, humans did not need shoes at all. Not because they hadn't figured out the technology. They had the technology, clearly. Ötzi is proof of that. They just didn't need it everywhere because the human foot, in its natural bare state, is honestly one of the most quietly impressive pieces of engineering biology has ever produced. And most people walking around today have absolutely no idea because they've spent their entire lives stuffing that engineering marvel into a padded box. Let's talk about what your foot is actually capable of, because I promise you, most of you have never once used it the way it was built to be used. The human foot has 26 bones. That's about a quarter of all the bones in your entire body, packed into a structure smaller than your forearm. It has 33 joints. It has over 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments, all working together in this incredibly intricate system designed to do two seemingly contradictory things at once: be rigid enough to push off the ground with force, and be flexible enough to absorb impact and adapt to uneven terrain. Rocks, roots, sand, mud, ice. The barefoot human foot can sense it, adjust to it, and grip it, almost instantly, without you consciously thinking about a single part of that process. And that sensing part is genuinely underrated. The sole of your foot is packed with nerve endings, way more than most people realize, which means every step you take barefoot is sending a flood of information straight to your brain about the surface beneath you. Is it soft? Is it slanted? Is there a sharp edge? Your nervous system processes all of that in real time and makes micro adjustments to your balance and stride before you're even consciously aware there's a decision being made. That's not a minor feature. That's basically a built-in sensor array that evolution spent millions of years perfecting. And most people have been walking around with it muffled inside a rubber sole since they were toddlers. Now here's the part that should really annoy your local shoe salesman. There's a structure in your foot called the plantar fascia, and it works alongside your Achilles tendon like a natural spring. When your heel strikes the ground barefoot, that impact gets absorbed and stored as elastic energy in the arch and tendon, and then released again as you push off, kind of like a slingshot. It's incredibly efficient. It's part of why humans, despite being slower than basically every predator that used to hunt us, became one of the best endurance runners on the entire planet. Not the fastest, the most relentless. There's a well-documented hunting strategy called persistence hunting, where early humans would chase an animal, not sprint after it, chase it for hours, sometimes most of a day, until the animal literally overheated and collapsed from exhaustion, because most four-legged animals can't pant and gallop at the same time to cool themselves down the way humans can sweat while running. Modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Kalahari Sand People have been documented doing exactly this in recent history, running down kudu and other antelope not through speed, but through sheer, absurd stubbornness, tracking the animal for hours across open, blistering terrain until it simply couldn't run anymore. Humans didn't win through claws or speed. They won through relentlessness and a foot and leg system built like a natural shock-absorbing engine. And that entire system depends on the foot being able to flex, feel, and spring the way it evolved to. Now put a thick, rigid, cushioned shoe on that same foot. What happens? The shoe takes over a huge chunk of that shock-absorbing job. Which sounds helpful, right? Less impact on your joints, that's what the commercials say. Except, here's the catch nobody puts on the shoebox. Muscles and tendons that don't have to work weaken. It's the same principle as a cast on a broken arm. Keep a limb immobilized and supported long enough, and the muscles around it start to atrophy because the body is relentlessly efficient. If it doesn't need to maintain something, it stops investing energy in it. Modern cushioned shoes do a mild version of that to your feet. every single day for basically your entire life. The rigid sole limits how much your toes spread and grip. The elevated heel changes your natural gait. The arch support does some of the spring-loading work your own arch used to do on its own. Multiply that by decades, and you get feet that are, in a very real sense, weaker and less capable than the feet of a hunter-gatherer from 10,000 years ago, despite having access to modern medicine, modern nutrition, and modern podiatry. That's not an insult, by the way. It's just physics and biology doing what they always do. Use it or lose it applies to feet exactly the same way it applies to biceps. So if barefoot feet are this efficient, this well-engineered, this evolutionarily optimized, why do modern humans get so many foot problems? Plantar fasciitis, bunions, flat feet, chronic ankle issues. Shouldn't ancient humans have had way worse feet, running around barefoot on rocks and thorns their whole lives? Here's where the story gets genuinely surprising, because the actual evidence points the other way. Researchers who've studied populations that still walk barefoot regularly, comparing them to populations who've worn structured shoes their whole lives, have found something that should honestly be a bigger headline than it is. Habitually barefoot populations tend to show lower rates of certain common foot deformities, including bunions and some forms of flat feet. Their arches are frequently stronger. Their toes tend to be straighter and more naturally spread, rather than pressed together into that narrow, pointed shape that a lot of modern shoes force them into. One often cited example involves the Tarahumara people of northern Mexico, famous for running extraordinary distances, sometimes over 100 miles, in nothing but thin, minimal sandals made from old tires and leather straps. They're not running those distances despite having minimal footwear. A lot of researchers argue they're able to run those distances precisely because their feet were never trained into weakness by decades of rigid cushioning. There's actual pressure plate and motion capture data comparing how barefoot runners strike the ground versus shoe-wearing runners, and it shows real differences in impact patterns, particularly around heel-striking behavior, which some researchers have linked to certain types of running injuries. None of this means shoes are evil or that you should throw yours in the trash the second this video ends. Modern environments are full of broken glass, hot pavement, and rusty nails that ancient humans, thankfully, did not have to deal with quite the same way. But it does mean that the assumption shoes are strictly an upgrade for your feet is a lot shakier than shoe marketing would like you to believe. And this is where we have to talk about the mummies, because they might be the single strangest piece of evidence in this entire story. When archaeologists study the preserved feet of ancient humans, from mummified remains to frozen bog bodies to skeletal analysis, one recurring finding keeps showing up. The arch and toe structure of ancient barefoot or minimally shod populations frequently looks remarkably close to what modern podiatrists consider an ideal, healthy foot shape. Wide forefoot, naturally spread toes, strong arch definition. Compare that to a lot of modern feet, and you often see the opposite. Narrowed forefeet, toes that have been gradually squeezed together, bunions forming at the base of the big toe where years of pointed shoes have literally reshaped the bone over time. Your foot, bones, especially earlier in life, are more adaptable than you'd think, and they will slowly reshape themselves to match whatever shape you cram them into for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, every single day, for years. That new pair of stylish, narrow-toed shoes you just bought? Your skeleton is quietly negotiating with them whether you asked it to or not. There's also the small matter of calluses, which sounds gross but is actually one of the cleverest things your body does. Walk barefoot consistently, and the skin on the sole of your foot gradually thickens in exactly the areas that need extra protection, forming a natural, custom-fitted layer of armor that's flexible enough to still let you feel the ground, but tough enough to handle sharp gravel and hot sand. It's a built-in, self-adjusting, zero-cost shoe that takes a few weeks to install and never needs replacing. Modern feet, kept soft and pampered inside shoes their whole lives, never really developed this properly, which is part of why stepping on a single stray Lego in your living room feels like a near-death experience. While someone who spent their life barefoot could probably stroll across your hallway of scattered toys without even noticing. Now, I promised you this involved Ice Age's mummies, bone scans, and one very stubborn tendon judging you. We've done the Ice Age. We've done the mummies. Let's talk about the tendon because it's honestly the funniest part of this whole story. Deep in the sole of your foot, running from your heel to the base of your toes, is that plantar fascia we mentioned earlier. In a habitually barefoot foot, this thing is thick, taut, and behaves like a properly tensioned spring, doing its job of storing and releasing energy with every step. But here's the thing about tendons and ligaments. They adapt to load, or the lack of it, just like muscles do. Spend years walking on artificially cushioned, artificially arch-supported surfaces, and that natural spring mechanism gets lazy. It doesn't have to work as hard, so it doesn't develop the same strength and elasticity. Then one day you decide to go for a nice long barefoot walk on the beach because you saw a video telling you it's great for you. No judgment, we've all been there. And that undertrained tendon, which has been coasting on shoe-assisted support for decades, suddenly gets asked to do a job it hasn't trained for in years. Cue the inflammation, cue the heel pain, cue you Googling, "Why does the bottom of my foot hurt at 2 a.m.?" blaming evolution, when really it's just a tendon that spent 20 years in a recliner suddenly being asked to run a marathon. This is actually a big reason why transitioning to minimalist or barefoot-style footwear has to be done gradually. There was even a whole wave of minimalist toe shoes that got popular a while back, promising to basically undo decades of cushioned living overnight, and a lot of people who jumped straight in without easing into it ended up with stress fractures and tendon injuries because they treated their feet like they'd been secretly barefoot trained the whole time, when really those feet had been living a very cushioned, very sheltered lifestyle since birth. It's not that your foot forgot how to be a foot. It's that decades of cushioned support created a kind of learned weakness, and reversing that takes time, patience, and probably a few uncomfortable weeks where you question every decision that led you to this point. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. So let's zoom back out and actually answer the question. Why didn't ancient humans wear shoes? The honest answer is layered, and it's more interesting than a simple yes or no. In the climates where the earliest humans lived and evolved, warm, temperate environments across Africa, there was very little evolutionary pressure to cover the feet, because the human foot, left to develop naturally from childhood, is remarkably well equipped to handle varied terrain, absorb impact, and provide sensory feedback that actually improves balance and movement efficiency. Shoes weren't a missing piece of technology waiting to be invented out of necessity. They were a solution to a specific problem, extreme cold, that only became relevant once humans started migrating into much harsher environments, chasing resources, following herds, spreading across an increasingly diverse and unforgiving planet. Once that migration happened, footwear stopped being optional in certain regions and started being survival gear. And from that point on, it slowly became more normalized, more refined, more decorative, and eventually, thousands of years later, became the multi-billion-dollar industry that convinces you that you absolutely need a shoe, with a name like a fighter jet and a price tag like a small vacation. But the deeper, more uncomfortable truth hiding underneath all of this is that the shift from shoes as a survival necessity in cold climates to shoes as a mandatory, everywhere, all the time default happened way faster than human foot biology could actually catch up with. Evolution doesn't work on a marketing timeline. Your foot still, right now, today, has the same essential structure, the same sensory wiring, the same spring-loaded tendon system that helped your ancestors run down prey across open plains, or wrap their feet in deerskin and grass to survive a mountain crossing 5,000 years ago. It's just spent the last several decades being politely, quietly muffled inside foam and rubber, told to sit down and let the shoe handle it, which honestly kind of makes you look at your own sneakers differently, doesn't it? Here's the thing that really should stick with you after this. Ancient humans weren't tougher than you because they were made of some different material. They weren't superhuman, their feet weren't magic. They just used their feet the way those feet were actually built to be used constantly from childhood without a rigid layer of foam training that system into semi-retirement. The reason barefoot running looks almost impossible to a modern person isn't because the human body can't do it. It's because most modern humans have spent their entire lives systematically, unknowingly training their feet not to do it. That's not a design flaw in humans. That's a side effect of comfort, convenience, and about a century of very effective shoe advertising. So next time you're at the beach, or in your backyard, or honestly just walking around your living room, try kicking off the shoes for a bit. Feel the ground. Let your toes actually spread out and do something. Give that plantar fascia a little bit of a wake-up call, gently, gradually. No need to go full Tarahumara on your first afternoon. Your feet have spent millions of years being one of the most quietly sophisticated tools evolution ever built. It seems like the least we could do is let them stretch their legs. Or, well, their toes. And if this kind of deep dive into the weird, overlooked corners of human evolution is your thing, there's a whole world of these stories buried in the details of how our bodies actually got here, stranger, funnier, and more surprising than most people ever learn in school.